In this screencast, we're going to talk about three different topics that are all related to each other: turbidity, biologic oxygen demand, or BOD, and eutrophication. And they're all linked together, so we'll cover them all in one fell swoop here. Okay, so let's start with turbidity. Turbidity is a term we use to refer to the cloudiness of water, the degree to which it lacks clarity. And so this is basically we have suspended sediments in the water. These could be mineral sediments like clay particles. They could be organic sediments, decomposing pieces of leaves or anything else like that, fecal matter, whatever. But anything that's going to make it so that the water is cloudy is going to increase its turbidity. And turbidity is in most cases, it's a problem for the aquatic organisms that are living there. Now, to measure turbidity, and I don't know if you'll actually have to do this on the AP test, but you should know that high turbidity means low transparency. So think of turbidity as a measure of cloudiness. So when you have high turbidity, you have high cloudiness in the water, you don't have much transparency. So high turbidity looks like this, low turbidity looks like this. It is they have an arbitrary unit of measure called nephelometric turbidity units, or NTUs. I doubt if you'd have to, you might have to like apply them, but you don't have to know what they are. But basically, it's a way of enumerating just how much suspended sediment is present in the water that's preventing it from being clear. Now, what causes it? Okay, so remember, it can either be like mineral particles, basically muds, or it can be biologic particles. So it tends to come from soil erosion is one of the main things that cause it, and that can be from bad agricultural practices, mining operations, construction sites, anything that basically exposes uh, bare soil with no vegetation on it. It tends to get runoff tends to carry it into streams. Anyway, it causes the streams to be very turbid. So what we find is often after a rain event, a stream that's normally clear will have high turbidity for a while because these eroded materials were brought into it. And you've probably noticed that yourself. In a big rain event, you look at the river, it's brown. You look at it, a week later, it's nice and clear. Okay, that's basically how that's the role that sediment played in increasing turbidity. It can also be caused by biologic material like dead plants or fecal material. A lot of times it take a lot of it to make it uh, you know cloudy to have high turbidity. But so it could be like from concentrated animal feed operation, or a municipal sewage system that's not operating properly. So you're putting a lot of biologic material that can do it as well. So what's bad about turbidity? Well, a couple of things. Okay, one is when that material settles out, especially if it's mineral particles like clay, as it settles out, it covers the things that are normally there, like the algae that would normally be living on these rocks to engage in photosynthesis are now covered up. They can't engage in photosynthesis. So not only are they not, photosynthesis releases oxygen, but now they're dying, and as they die, bacteria eat them, and then they use up what oxygen is there. So we tend to find that turbidity increases are often followed by dissolved oxygen decreases because of the blocking of sunlight from algae. Now, another thing that turbidity does is it directly increases the temperature of the water, because when that light comes into it, it hits that water and the minerals in the water, and they absorb the energy. That's why you can't see through it, because they're basically blocking light. They're absorbing light. Well, remember, you can't create or destroy energy. That's the first law of thermodynamics. So as that light energy goes in the water but doesn't come out, the water has to get hotter. Okay, so the water gets warmer. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is dissolved oxygen is temperature dependent. So gases tend to be more soluble in water at low temperature than high temperature. So when the temperature is low, you can get a lot of oxygen or whatever the gas dissolved into the water. And as the temperature of the water comes up, its ability to hold dissolved gases goes down. So we find that for dissolved oxygen, if I make the temperature go up, the amount of oxygen in the water goes significantly down, and this causes the stress and even death of aquatic organisms. Now let's talk about biologic oxygen demand. It takes a little bit to get your head around this one here, so we'll just call it BOD. Okay, so basically, we use it as a way of measuring the amount of dissolved oxygen that bacteria or other microorganisms consume as they engage in aerobic decomposition. So the idea is you have organic compounds in the water, which are causing it to be turbid, and then microorganisms are going to eat these particles. Now, this is if they're organic, not if they're clays, but if they're like fecal particles, for instance. And so what happens is, or leaf particles, okay, biologic stuff, the stuff that has food component to it. As they eat, they respire. As they respire, they take oxygen out of the water. So we tend to find that these microorganisms demand oxygen. And so technically, BOD is the degree to which these organisms are taking oxygen out of the water. But we often use it as a measure of how much organic pollutants are in the water. It was like, let's not blame the poor microorganism. Let's blame the person who dumped all this uh, this this uh, biologic material in the water. Now, so here's the idea. So look at this graph here that I was able to draw for you here. It gives you the idea what happens as biologic oxygen demand goes up. It tends to make the oxygen level in the water go down. So it should make sense, right? You're going to have less dissolved oxygen when there's a greater demand for it. Now, of course, as the oxygen goes down, the things that are demanding the oxygen end up suffocating as well. So these two things are interrelated to each other, as we'll see in just a moment here. But now the main thing to know is this. Always with eutrophication events or other events like this, when you have a drop in dissolved oxygen, the larger fish, the ones that have the greatest need for oxygen, die first. Okay, so we get these fish kills associated with DO decreases. And remember, we talked earlier in the year that there's a variety of organisms that live in a stream, for instance, that you could look at, like a caddisfly larva or black fly larva. And you can look at, they have different, we use them as indicator species, but usually we're using it as indicator for about how much dissolved oxygen is present, because that's one thing, that tolerance level that we talked about with the corals, the tolerance for dissolved oxygen varies greatly among species, and some of the higher order vertebrates, they really don't like it if you mess with their oxygen levels. So where does this BOD come from? Well, it comes from municipal sewage. Right? So when you have a sewage spill maybe someone has a bad a malfunctioning septic system, or something goes wrong, and this happens all the time, and all of a sudden a municipal waste treatment facility just has to dump raw feces into the water. Another thing that can do it a lot of times is concentrated animal feed operation. We talked about, like, you have these lagoons in which they're settling out all the feces that they washed out of the feedlot. And what happens is sometimes a flooding event will come along and just take all that and just dump it in the water. Well, that's a lot of food for bacteria that happens there. It can also be things like leaf litter, pet feces, and of course, like dead algae as a result of a eutrophication event. So remember, eutrophication, we've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. It's a big deal in this course. So technically, eutrophication occurs when we add nutrients to a system, phosphorus and nitrogen. When you add nutrients to a system, what happens is you are promoting the growth of these plants, these single-cell plants called algae. As the algae population goes up, they tend to block light from the ones down below. And so as those ones die and sink to the bottom, they begin to decay. And so now there's this biologic oxygen demand created because these bacteria are going to eat these. And as they do, what we tend to find is we have this growing dead zone that happens as the dissolved oxygen level goes down here. So let's be careful here. So eutrophication is caused by the addition of nutrients. Biologic oxygen demand is just a way of measuring the degree to which we're expecting the oxygen to decrease in the water as a result of organisms. So sometimes we just add fecal material, and true, it has nutrients, but it also is food itself. Okay. Now, terms they sometimes use to talk about this. So hypoxia means a lack of oxygen, right? So if you're suffocating, you're suffering from hypoxia. So a hypoxic waterway is one that just doesn't have much dissolved oxygen in it. So you're going to have a lot of mortality of things that like fish and shellfish and different kinds of crustaceans and things like that. So basically, when you have a hypoxic waterway, what happens is that there's going to be usually a lot of algae in the water, and there's just too many nutrients, and so the animal population is going to be really low because as these algae die, there's this biologic oxygen demand as a result of that. Now, An allotropic waterway, that's a fancy word for it, allotropic, is basically one that does not have eutrophication, does not have a problem with this oxygen demand. So we have not reduced the DO, and as a result, the algae populations tend to be stable. They're not growing rapidly. Animal life is varied and abundant. There's a lot of biodiversity in the fish species, in the uh, different invertebrate species. And so basically, this is a healthy aquatic ecosystem. So think of allotropic meaning healthy, it hasn't been messed with. Hypoxic means the DO is really down because of eutrophication, some release of fecal material. So now a sag curve is kind of a cool thing that I want you to get your head around. Okay, so an oxygen sag curve is a graphic way of representing the changes in BOD and DO that happen when organic matter is added to a stream from a point source, say like let's say a concentrated animal feed operation. This is putting feces into the water. Okay, so basically, what's tricky with this is you read them from left to right, and this is basically distance, not time. So we're saying I'm moving from this point here, which is could be in this case. This looks like this is where the biologic material was introduced into the waterway, and then this is moving farther and farther away from it as we move downstream from that place where it's being put in. And so what we tend to find in this is kind of now the y-axis is the biologic oxygen demand and dissolved oxygen content, usually shown as two separate lines. Okay, so we see here is this is the BOD. So we've introduced a lot of feces. So there's say from an animal feed operation. Now there's a lot of biologic oxygen. What's going to happen? Well, oxygen is going to plummet because we're demanding it, right? Well, as that happens, these organisms that are demanding it are going to start to suffocate, and so we reach this minimum of dissolved oxygen, and it can bottom out almost all the way to zero and to become completely hypoxic, anaerobic at that point. But as that happens, these aerobic bacteria, their populations are going to go down because they're basically suffocating themselves by over respiring. Okay, and as that happens, then the oxygen can come back up, and then these organisms, as we get farther and farther from the point source, continue to drop down to become more dilute, and as they become more dilute, the dissolved oxygen comes back up. Okay, so it doesn't get all the way back up to the top here because we still have some organisms that are demanding that oxygen in the water. So basically, it's as we move away from the point source, dilution tends to reduce the BOD, and what happens is we have that initial sag in the oxygen, which then comes back up as the biologic oxygen demand goes down through dilution. So this graphic here I really like a lot. This really shows it quite well. And I like this one because it shows a clean zone before and afterwards. So here we have a normal allotropic water system that has plenty of dissolved oxygen in it. We have great biodiversity of insects and other invertebrates and fish species. But at this point here, we've discharged a bunch of biologic waste, some feces. Okay, and what happens is we get this sag curve, right? So here the concentration of waste is very high. As I move away, I like this graphic because I can see it becoming dispersed and more dilute. So initially, it's very concentrated, so the bacteria are eating a lot of it, so the oxygen plummets, and so we get the zone right near it where we just have very little in the way of healthy fish. We have like trash fish. We have like carp, which you see in the streams here in Korea, gars, we have leeches, things like that. What happens though is as we move even further away, it has the process has a chance to take even further. So you would think the biggest problem would happen right near the point source, but it actually happens a little ways downstream because it's a process that takes time. So there's less and less and less oxygen in the stream as we move down. So there's a certain distance away from the point source where we're going to reach the bottom of the oxygen sag, and at that point here, we have those things that are most like those weird worms and or maybe nothing. Okay, so there's basically no fish left in the stream. There's no shellfish left in the stream. There's no crayfish. There's very few things. Just a few of those really resistant worm species can be here. All right, and then what happens is now we've basically depleted the oxygen to the point that the bacteria aren't aren't consuming it anymore, and it starts to come back up. And so again, we get a zone just beyond this totally hypoxic region where we're going to get fish coming back in. But these are kind of, we call them trash fish, like carp and gars and leeches. But then eventually we get far enough away that the problem has sort of sorted itself out. What's going to get eaten has gotten eaten. What hasn't gotten eaten has gotten diluted enough that we go back to having clear water with high biodiversity of fish and invertebrates again. Okay, I love that graphic. Here's another one just because I like it so much. But this one just talks about, I like this one because it talks about the different invertebrate species that we could use as indicator species. Okay, we talked about this before. Let's do it again. Okay, so dead zones are a result of eutrophication, but we can also talk about them in terms of biologic oxygen demand. So the idea here is rivers that are draining cities, which might have like animal feces or municipal sewage discharge. We have agricultural discharge, which could include animal waste, but it could also include just nutrients, from fertilizers. These things get carried into the ocean, and when they do, they're going to cause that we've introduced all of these nutrients, so we're going to get a plankton bloom. And as this plankton bloom grows, the ones down below get shaded out and they die and they sink to the bottom. Now this produces a biologic oxygen demand from all the dead plankton. Now there could be biologic oxygen demand because we brought in sewage as well. But basically, the light can't get down to here, so these ones die. And then there's so much in the way of biologic oxygen demand here that we get this hypoxic region. But unlike a stream, there's no diminishment with distance. We just get this dead zone that has to take a while over time to sort itself out. And as we pointed out before, the Mississippi River in North America carries all this agricultural and municipal waste. There's all these nutrients and feces and things like that coming into the Gulf of Mexico. The general currents tend to carry it this way. And so we have all this eutrophication happening here. We have this fairly permanent dead zone that happens as a result of increased BOD and decreased DO. Thanks for watching.